Hi everybody. So this video is going to be to go over some of the key points in this week's notes. Now, unlike the last 2 weeks, the notes this week, well, not even unlike that, they're a little easier um, in that there's less sort of specific terms that you need to be applying. It's more about a way of thinking about problems. And we're most specifically going to be talking about stakeholders and then key facts in bioethical decisions. Now, um, okay, so before we do this, I really need you to go back and make sure that you've already completed the Hurricane Katrina podcast notes. Don't don't do this activity until you've completed those notes, because there's going to be some work at the end of the this notes activity where I ask you to consider some of the stuff that happened in that podcast, and you just won't be able to do it effectively without that. Okay, so stakeholders. Stakeholders are the term that we use in bioethics to describe just the people that are impacted by a decision. So if we decide, well, we should give the vaccine to these people, we should send these people on the first boat out of the hospital, we should, whatever. Have the self-driving car drive through the dog and two people in the crosswalk. Once you make that decision, there are going to be some people impacted by that decision, and those are the stakeholders. And that's what's described here in green, right? And then I give you an example. So imagine an unconscious patient, they need to be resuscitated, their heart needs to be restarted. They're in the hospital, but they signed a legal document called a DNR saying they do not want to be resuscitated. So they don't want to have their heart restarted if it stops. The doctors decide to obey the patient's wishes and allow them to die, while family members want to restart their heart and save their life. So whose wishes are followed in this case? Well, the action taken is to not restart their heart. And that's what the doctors decide to do. They decide to value the the legal document that the person whose heart has stopped signed, saying they don't want to, right? So, but who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that are involved? Well, the patient is most obviously involved because they don't want their heart restarted, and they're the ones dying, right? The doctors are involved, right? They're probably the second most important in this case because they're responsible for caring for their patients and respecting the wishes of their patients while also trying to preserve life, which is their job, right? That's part of their code. So they just kind of come into conflict, right? They want to save life, but the person has asked them not to do certain things to save their life. And then another stakeholder, obviously, is the family, right? They're also probably in that second level of importance, and they want to preserve the life of the patient, maybe because they love them or for whatever reason, right? And so they have a stake, right? It's called a stakeholder. It's like they have a claim, something that is important about this decision for them. And I like to think of stakeholders as kind of a ring of circles, right? So there's the decision in the middle, and then as you move out from that decision, there are different levels of people impacted. So the patients right at the center of the decision. They're the one who's most directly impacted. And then you have the doctors and family members who love that person or whose job it is to care for that person. They're obviously impacted, right? Or the ones that have to actually carry out the action. And then there's another ring, right? Maybe the friends of that patient, or maybe the religious organization that patient belongs to, right? Or maybe future patients who are in the same situation and would like their wishes respected, right? They have a stake in the decision as well, because if the doctors decide, oh, well, we'll just do what the family wants, well, then that takes away rights of future patients who would like to have a DNR. Okay, so I think of it as concentric circles. And one of the skills I want you to do in this class is to learn how to think about who is impacted by the decision. The most obvious people in the center, they're the easiest to find. The second ring is usually pretty easy. It can be harder to imagine those outer rings, right? Well, a lot of times it's these bigger organizations who have an interest in having our society act a certain way, right? Okay, so that's stakeholders. Then the other thing you need to consider on these notes is what the legal facts are, scientific and legal facts. So we can't make a decision in bioethics unless we have some facts to base that decision on, right? Um, and you have to identify what the most important facts are before you take an action. Okay, so um, I gave you some facts in this case study, right? They had a DNR. They said they didn't want to be resuscitated. The doctors decided to allow them, and the family wanted them to restart the heart and save the life. But what if I gave you some additional facts, right? And I said, would this change your thoughts about it? Should we have resuscitated that person or not? Legally, right now, they would not. If you have a DNR, it doesn't matter what your family wants. The hospital, the doctors are legally not allowed to save your life. But would that be changed if different situations true? What if if resuscitating the person meant that they would live, but they would be in a coma with little or no chance of waking up? Do you think that's an important fact to know? Right? What if the patient had signed the legal document asking not to be resuscitated when they thought they were going to die from cancer? And now that cancer is in remission and they just haven't had time to legally remove that document, right? And if they were resuscitated now, they could still have a long life. Well, maybe we should resuscitate them then, right? Knowing that fact might matter. What if the patient was a minor, was a child, right? Does that affect the decision? What if the family members asking them to be resuscitated could make money by keeping that person alive even longer, even if they were in a coma, right? Would that affect your decision, right? So we need to collect the important facts before we go forward with making a decision, okay? The problem is in bioethics, we often don't have all the facts. We have as many facts as we can, and we make the best decision with the facts that we have. And so this is where I'd like you to start thinking about Hurricane Katrina. So again, if you haven't done this already, please go back to it and finish it. In Hurricane Katrina, the facts changed. The first 2 days, if you go back and look at your notes, after the flood and after the hurricane, they were evacuating patients from the hospital, and they were evacuating patients that needed the most, right? Boats were coming in, they were loading the very sickest people on those boats and sending them out and getting the people that needed the most amount of care out of the hospital on the idea that people who need less care will be fine. They can wait in the hospital until rescued, but the people that need the most care, we need to get them out fast. That was the first couple days in a scenario where a boat was coming and helping people, right? They gave priority. They made a bioethical decision to maximize benefits and minimize harms by triaging or giving the most care to the people who needed the most, right? But then things changed and the facts changed, right? And so if you look at your answers on what happened on days 3 through 5, I think there's one area actually I want you to check. The answer to the numbering system, a lot of you got that one confused. Well, not confused. Your numbering system was accurate, but your interpretation was wrong. Some of you said, not all of you, so you do need to go and read your answer to see what you put there. Some of you said that they were triaging, which is what they were doing, and that they were helping the people with the most need first. That's not what they were doing on days 3 through 5. That is what they were doing on days 1 and 2. But on days 3 through 5, they'd lost power. It had gotten well over 100 degrees in the hospital. They'd stopped having rescue boats coming. I mean, it was a terrible situation. They were out of water. The people who had been the doctors and nurses there had now been working for 72 hours or more straight. I mean, imagine staying awake for 2 or 3 days, constantly caring for people, and the amount of stress that puts on them. So now the facts are very different than the first couple days. And so they did create a numbering system. It was not to give the most care to the ones with the most need. Instead, it was to give the most care. Get people out first who had the best chance of surviving. Not the ones who needed the most help to survive, but instead now they were evacuating the healthiest people first. Okay? Because they had the best chance of making it. Their thought process is switched. Instead of thinking, okay, who needs the most help? Let's help them first. Now they're thinking let's just help the people that even have a chance. And everybody else is kind of well, The other people, if you were a 3, or you were one of these, I mean, they didn't have a number for them, but if you were one of these sort of hidden number 4 people, the ones that a few of those doctors and nurses decided, like, we're going to give them a lethal dose of morphine and help them die, they were not assuming that they were going to be able to help you at all. So review your answers on that. And then when you go back to the assignment, I have an example, right? I decided to break down the stakeholders and facts for when they decided to euthanize the dogs, kill them, right? They decided to give them lethal doses of drugs to help them die painlessly. That was a decision that was made by some of the employees. Who were the stakeholders? So I identified all the people that might be care about this decision. So the dogs, the dog owners, the healthcare workers that euthanized the dogs, right? That probably was traumatic for them. The patients in the hospital, even though they weren't the ones killing the dogs and they weren't their dogs, they're stakeholders. And here's why. So what were the facts? The dogs were having seizures because they were being dehydrated. They were giving the patients water instead of the dogs. And, so the patients are a stakeholder, right? If you're going to keep the dogs alive, then the patients are going to suffer more. They were 3 to 4 days into being stranded. They didn't do this on the first day, right? They did it after there was no electricity, no heat, very little water. No one was expecting to be rescued because so few helicopters had come, especially since the first 2 days. The caregivers were exhausted. Several days now of caring for human patients. There's I mean, they talk about the smell must have been terrible because there was no, the toilets weren't working, right? So all the human waste was building up. The patients were dying, and the dogs could be euthanized painlessly. So that was the decision they made. These are the stakeholders. These were the facts that they were using, right? I'm going to ask you to do this again 2 times for 2 different decisions. I need you to find an action that they took on days 1 and 2. Okay. It can be any decision you want. Okay. But whatever that decision is, you're going to write the decision here. They decided to do this, right? Who were the stakeholders involved in that decision, and what facts were they working with when they made that decision? And then I need you to find another action that they decided to take on days 3 through 4. Okay, it can be any action they decided to take. You may need to go back and review the podcast or look at your notes if they were detailed enough. List all the stakeholders. Same way I listed all the stakeholders here. I'm expecting multiple stakeholders, and I'm looking for you to go beyond that first ring. I want you to be looking at your notes up here. If you're not going to do well. I mean, you're going to struggle on this. And then what facts are they working with, right? And that's your formative work on using stakeholders and identifying facts. Okay? Let me know if you have questions.